And this novel, Storberry, is my first novel. I began writing Storberry at a time when most readers and writers alike thought that the classic vampire novel was passé, and that there simply wasn't any room for that anymore. That today's readers wanted to hear about sparkly vampires, and vampires who kissed very well, and did things like Twilight, and Vampire Diaries, yeah, that's it, yeah. So anyway, I decided to break the convention and write a classic vampire tale. And Storberry ended up on the bestseller horror list on Amazon, right beside Stephen King, who happened to write a novel called Salem's Lot, which is possibly one of the greatest horror novels ever created, and it was also a classic vampire tale. So I do believe that the genre still has legs to it, and I'd like to read you a passage from Storberry. This contains a passage which is fairly early in the book and will not in any way spoil the rest of the story for anybody who wishes to read on. This involves Tom and Jen, two teenagers who are kind of having a teasing courtship relationship with each other right now. And they have been walking through a meadow, and they're about to venture dangerously close to the forest, which many people in the town believe to be haunted. Jen had been afraid of the old garage for as long as he'd known her. Her stories of a monster hiding in the dark crawl space above her garage had haunted him when he was young. But they were teenagers now. It was past time to reason this out. For reasons Tom didn't understand, though Jen was utterly frightened of her old garage, she was only mildly unsettled by the presence of the forest. Tom had hiked through the mountains of the forest of Virginia with his parents many times. He knew about the diversity of life which inhabited the forest, and how the rich, fecund smell of the forest floor promised growth and life. Those smells and sounds were absent here. In their place was something reminiscent of pond water out of balance. He wasn't afraid of horror movies, monsters, or the boogeyman, but he was afraid of what he couldn't see in the forest. How about another dare, she asked. Oh, I don't think so, Jen. I dare you to enter the forest and go as far as that big oak tree at the edge of the darkness, she said, pointing about 30 yards into the forest. They'd run with neighborhood friends through the meadow all their lives, and sometimes they'd even entered the boundary of the forest to hide. But nobody ventured into its depths. The reason most kids claimed was the forest was too dark to safely run through. What if you stumbled into a hunter's trap, or fell into an unseen hole? What if wild animals waited in the dark? The real reason was more likely born of the stories they told each other around campfires and at sleepovers. Stories about the evil things that lived deep in the forest, people who disappeared never to be seen again, or the dead which returned from its interior. Every town has its haunted house. For Storberry, it had always been the hill forest. How about you do it instead, Tom asked. Oh yeah? I will, not a problem. As Jen walked towards the trees, a chill welled up in Tom's chest, and he grabbed her by the arm. That was a joke. You're not going in there, forget it. Now who's afraid of monsters? I'm not afraid of monsters. Let's be serious here. I hardly see anything at all past that oak. How do you know there isn't a bear or a coyote just waiting for you to walk right up to it? Or a ghost? Stop that. Or a crazy man with an axe, she said with eyes large and exaggerated. I doubt it. But all sorts of things live in the forest. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't out there. Well, one of us has to go in. No, one of us does not need to go in. This is just one of your dares, and it's not a very good one. Let's fish some more. Best 2 out of 3? Tell you what, she said. We'll do it together. We'll both walk to that tree, touch it, and get out of there. 1 minute tops. At that moment, he would have done most anything she asked him, though the farthest reaches of his brain screamed danger. Consciously, he reasoned, it was just a forest and there was nothing to fear. If there really was a bear out there, they would have heard it by now. Did he really believe in monsters? No. So what was the harm in walking with Jen into the forest? And how would she view him if he chickened out? Nothing seemed to make sense about the hill forest. Why weren't crickets chirping in the dark, or wildlife rustling through the leaves? Why is it so quiet? Tom Kingsley, don't tell me you are too afraid to walk into the forest with me. And that was all she needed to say. The internal scale tipped. The right side of his brain claimed control. Rational thought prevailing. After all, this was no more dangerous than walking into a dark room at night, flipping on the light switch. Hadn't he always been afraid of the dark? Many times as a child, his fear was greatest the moment before the light turned on. What would the light reveal this time waiting for him? Irrational fears are never realized. There was never a decrepit witch cackling, or a crazy man with a butcher's knife crashing out of a bedroom closet. There was always just a room, whose dirty clothes piled in a corner where the left side of his brain had interpreted the shadow shape as writhing snakes. No, of course not, he said. So let's go. One condition, Jen, no messing around. Scout's honor, she said, raising one hand in the air in mock sincerity. I'm serious. Walking slowly side by side, they entered the forest. Weak sunlight filtered through overhead branches. Jen smiled at him, as if to say, see, there's nothing to be afraid of. Tom's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the forest for hidden dangers. The stillness beyond the inner boundary unsettled him. Halfway to the big oak, he saw that the first layer of darkness had been nothing more than an optical illusion. With the sunlight cloaked by the forest behind them, his eyes adjusted to make out larger trunks behind their target. But the darkness became absolute past that point. He was certain that was no optical illusion. The trees deeper into the forest grew huge, crowded together to form a barrage of foliage and branches impervious to sunlight. The only available light at the forest center would be in small pools of gray, widely scattered across the leaf-strewn floor. The brown matted twigs and dried leaves crunched underfoot like brittle bones. The crackles died with each step, with unnatural reverberation, as though they walked inside a soundproof room. Tom didn't approach the target oak so much as he was drawn to it against his will. Closer and closer it drew him. The deep contours of the bark further rendered with each step. The air quality, which should have overflowed with health from abundant photosynthesis, tasted sour. When they were several steps from the big oak, Tom's anxiety grew stronger. He began to fear that Jen might run into the woods, laughing and expecting him to chase after her. Tom didn't think she would take such a foolish risk in the low light, but he knew it was not unlike her to do something unpredictable. He imagined her bolting into the darkness and daring him to follow. What would he do then? Would he be able to find her in the gloom without becoming lost? The oak drew closer. They reached their target. No boogeymen here. They laid their hands on the moss-covered bark, and Jen shrugged her shoulders. I guess the monsters are too afraid to show their faces, she whispered. He was relieved she hadn't done anything crazy to tease him. As he breathed deeply, somewhat sickened by the stagnant air, the forest interior pressed against him with unnatural warmth. His instincts screamed for him to turn back while there was still time. A branch snapped, somewhere in the darkness. From where? Jen stopped smiling. Her eyes met his questioningly. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. If there was a bear or a coyote out there, he wasn't far away. Could they outrun an animal? When Jen started to say something, Tom cut her off by pressing a finger to his lips. A deathly silence settled over the forest. The ancient trees stared down at them. Branches grew outward like gnarled arms and talons. We aren't alone, he thought. They stood frozen, eyes struggling to cut through the shadows. Tom saw Jen was scared. So dark. You don't want to flip the light switch on this time. Another branch cracked. Closer. Snapped out of his trance, he grabbed Jen by the arm. Terror spread across her face. He pulled her from the tree as shadows shifted in the darkness. They ran across the pitfalls of the forest floor, tree limbs whipping past their faces in a blur, slapping and scratching at their skin. The snapping of branches pursued them out of the darkness, coming quicker now. Somehow he knew they needed to get to the light. The sunlit meadow was not far ahead, appearing as an amorphous sheet of white. Leaves rustled, branches snapped behind them. Closer, gaining on them. The filtered light at the forest edge grew stronger. They burst into the meadow. Past the cemetery they ran, through the tall grass, towards Beck's pond. Tom no longer felt the pursuit, but was certain it was close behind. The pond water shimmered in the distance, reflecting the dying sunlight so loudly that the pond seemed to shout for them to reach its edge. Tom's lungs burned as his legs pumped. He pulled Jen along, forcing her to keep pace. They were out of breath when they pulled to a stop at Beck's Pond. Jen could have sprinted another 10 yards without collapsing. Tom finally allowed himself to look back. The distant forest edge cloaked whatever lay beyond in a shroud of black. He watched for signs of movement, expecting something to crash out of the forest. Nothing came. Jen bent forward with her hands on her knees and gathered her breath. Her eyes met his, and there was an unspoken understanding that passed between them. The danger had been real. They both felt it. The sun fell lower. The western sky painted in fiery orange. Hellfire, he thought, with a shiver. The drone of car engines moved between Main Street and Blakely Hill. A dog howled from the western edge of Maple Street. It was answered by another howl from the east. They gathered up their fishing rods and hastened down the winding path. Tom didn't wish to be near the forest edge when darkness fell. That's it.